Hello, welcome to episode 214 of the Epic Film Challenge 2, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die, from 1959, Apur Sansar, The World of Appu, the final film in the Appu Trilogy directed by Satyajit Ray. I was really intrigued to see how this trilogy was going to close out, considering how much I adored the first film, how much I appreciated but at the same time was disappointed in the second film. Where was this third film going to take me in the story of this man, this boy, growing up from literally a child, a baby born in the beginning of the first movie, to this adult in his 20s in this third film. We pick up with Appu as, I guess, roughly a 20-something guy living on his own, living in relative squalor, which is a state of being that he has become accustomed to throughout his entire life. He's living on very little. He has obviously finished college and his education that we saw him begin in the second film, and is trying to be a writer, which I thought was really cool and appropriate to the character, considering that talk he had with his teacher in the second film where he was like, we see promise in you, Appu. You know, you should read books, you should learn about the world, learn about all the great philosophers and poets and all that kind of stuff. And that really sparked something within Appu to learn and to explore more of the world. And he, you know, becomes this aspiring writer. It felt very true to the character. He had this bookshelf with all these books that he's got, though he's pawning them off just to live. His landlord comes in and is like, how many months has it been now since you paid the rent? And Appu's very flippant about this. He's laughing it off, and you know, he's very much at this free state of being. Like, he is just trying to do what he wants to do and not really worrying about the, you know, the brass tacks of paying for your rent and having money to eat. He's more living off the idea of doing what he wants to do. A lot of this film is about that. It's about following your passion and not necessarily the set order of things. You know, he could get, you know, a job if he really wanted to. There's a scene where he goes and tries to get a job, I think as a teacher, but he's overqualified, and so he doesn't get the job. He goes to another place and they're like, okay, well, if you want a job, look in the back, that's what you got to do. He looks in the back and it's just these guys on an assembly line just putting labels onto bottles monotonously, and he just looks at it and you can just tell what he's thinking, and he doesn't take the job. And you don't need to be given that kind of verbal cue. You don't need like the narration of him going, well, I knew I couldn't do that. You just get that, you know, that's beneath him, and that's not in a bad way. It's just this idea of working for stuff that maybe you don't need, you know. And obviously you can kind of debate whether he really needed to get a proper job because he was, you know, not paying his rent, but he was doing some tutoring on the side, but he wasn't making enough to live, but was still just trying to work on this book that he was writing. He wakes up one morning, his pages are like strewn around the bed and the wind's blowing in through the open window, there's ink all over the bed and stuff. He's very much just living day to day. He has a friend called Pulu, I believe, and again, with the actors' names and so on, I'm not really going to get them except for Appu and his friend Pulu, who I really liked as a character. I liked that kind of, not even support system, because it's implied that they haven't seen each other for a very long time, and that Appu hasn't really made time for anyone in his life except for himself. He's become this solitary person who is just working away at this book and just pursuing his own creativity, as opposed to, you know, wasting his days, in his mind probably, doing menial work and, you know, not really putting anything out into the world, you know, just that drone work. And I've known a few people in my life who won't work because they don't see the point, you know, and they do nothing. That they follow their own thing. They march to the beat of their own drum, and they think, why should I work for someone else to earn money to buy shit I don't really want in the first place? And there are people who hate that mindset, and I can certainly appreciate it from a certain perspective. I think that it's the way of things that I feel like you need to kind of to do the things that you want to do. You need to conform to that system up to a point. But you know, I borderline respect people who take that notion and run with it literally, and just follow their own thing, but it becomes a bit impractical at times and you end up relying on other people. But he is very much self-reliant, but to the point where, you know, he really has some debts. Anyway, in the middle of the film, he ends up taking up a proper job from Pulu, who hooks him up with a better paying job, and he ends up kind of getting back on his feet in that sense. But it was intriguing to follow Appu in that period where he was just more concerned with doing his own thing. And there's a wonderful scene where him and Pulu go out for a meal and a little bit of a drink, and they're walking back home across these train tracks in the darkness, and it's this long tracking shot of them just walking and talking and laughing, and he's talking about all these things and quoting these writers that he was, you know, enamored with, and how he wants to do this and he wants to do that. And I just thought it was an excellent scene that felt so natural and just felt like we were peeking on someone's real life interaction. And I've certainly had those nights with friends where it's just the two of you and you're walking around in the middle of the night, you know, just talking about nothing in particular, but it all feels so meaningful and memorable. And then, you know, it furthers past this point of him just on his own doing his own thing to a very pivotal scene or sequence in the film where he goes to a wedding. And it's one of those arranged Indian weddings, and arranged marriages have been kind of touched on in this series. In the first film, his sister Durga got to see one of her friends get entered into a arranged marriage. That was more of a kind of snapshot, though. It wasn't really delved into as an idea, but it was very much a part of the culture and touched on in that scene where Durga sees her friend get married away at a very young age. In this film, Appu goes with his friend to his cousin's wedding and his friend's cousin's wedding. And the groom turns up for this arranged marriage, but he's got a mental disorder. He's not right in the head, and so the family are very annoyed at this. And this really looks at that idea of arranged marriage and how set and regimented it was, to the point where the family were distraught because this is the day. My daughter has to get married today. If she can't, that's it. She's done. She's finished. Like she's you know, used goods after tomorrow, because it has to be today. It has to be at this specific hour, and there's one more hour at 10 o'clock tonight, and after that it's over. So Pulu's like, Appu, will you marry, you know, my cousin? And so Appu's like, no, of course I'm not going to just marry someone like that. Are you kidding me? And then he starts to think, well, maybe it's a noble thing to do, and Appu ends up getting married to this young girl. I like the scene with them together in the bedroom, and he's just saying, you know, do you know anything about me? I don't know anything about you. How is this going to work? You live in these nice houses with this rich lifestyle, and I've got nothing. You know, this is just a bad idea. And she's like, well, I'll get used to it. He's like, no, seriously, you know, I've got nothing. I'm poor. You'd have to go and live in a completely different world. And she's like, well, that's what I'll do then. So he takes her back to his home, and kind of a sweet romance develops between the two. And I think that it's such a touching moment in the film when she decides to just take him for what he is. But you still see through her performance, which was wonderful, by the way. The actress who played her was great, and very young when she made the film. She really conveys the sadness when she first gets there, when she realizes that this is the next chapter in her life away from her parents. And it's actually kind of a counterpoint to how Appu felt, or seemed to feel, when he moved away from home for the first time in the second film, where he was just like, you know, excited to learn and do all this kind of stuff. She had that moment of self kind of reflection, and when she looks out of the window and sheds a tear, but then she gets back to it and she decides to be this kind of dutiful wife. But there is this sweet romance that develops between the two, and I really loved seeing it unfold. And then the last act of the film takes it in another different place, which was really moving and intense and frustrating and heartbreaking and uplifting. There was all these emotions in that last third of the film that I just I really got wrapped up in. And I think the actor who played Appu was fantastic. A couple of moments where he was kind of laughing out loud as this kind of like just shrugging things off, or just laughing at how ridiculous the situations he was finding himself in were. I feel like that those laughing scenes were maybe a little bit overplayed, but apart from that, he really brought so much to the character, and it felt like a natural progression of the character. So I do feel like it's just that one kid in the beginning of the second film who doesn't really match up with the other four actors who played Appu across this entire trilogy, but I loved the guy who played him here. I just liked that it was a different flavor, a different perspective on the character and on adulthood in some ways, but also he's only in his 20s. I mean, I would have loved to have seen this continue. You know, Appu in his 30s, his 40s, his 50s, his 60s. And considering how long Ray worked as a director, it would have been really cool to see him kind of continue that on. But and it certainly ends in a way that could easily lend to more chapters in the Appu story. But I liked where it ended very much, and it it brought the series back to the power of the first film. Not quite as much, I'll say, But I definitely almost rolled a tear at the end, and I think that it just it was a great film, and there's a lot of great memorable moments in it, like Appu and his wife in the cab, you know, and her talking about how you can't be spending money on this kind of thing, and again, Appu, even though he has become this this husband, and he now has, you know, this prospective family to take care of, and he's gotten a proper job, and he's become this clerk, and, you know, maybe conform to the things he didn't want to do, and he talks about how since he got married to her, he hasn't worked on his book. And she says, you know, well, that's a bad thing. And he's like, no, it's not, you know, because you're my focus now, and that's not. It's a really sweet scene, it really is. And a bit weird that the actor was like 23, 24, and the actress was like 13 or 14, but, you know, there's nothing sexual about this romance in the film, which I liked considering the age difference, but it was just very sweet and endearing, and it evoked something of a further romance. Like, it wasn't like this passionate thing from the get-go. It was this kind of slowly building connection between the two where, you know, they've been forced together by this very weird circumstance, but they're starting to grow affection for each other. And seeing this girl who comes from riches and comes from a much different lifestyle come to this, again, squalor, and kind of, you know, be okay with it, and kind of just, you know, get used to it, and convince Appu to work less so he could be home more, so she could see him. And that's when he kind of realizes that she really likes him. And I love the scene when they say goodbye on the train. She goes home for a couple of months, and trains are a very big part of the film, a huge part of the film, a huge part of the series, I should say. The symbolism of the train is really interesting. In the first film, it's that symbol of something bigger than the world that they're living in. When Appu and Durga go out and they see the train going past on the field, and it's this wonder, like they keep hearing the train at night, and he's like, you know, have you ever seen a train before? And she's like, well, I'll go take you to see one. It's this symbol of freedom and, you know, of something more again in the world. In the second film, when Appu and his mother return to living alone together, and in, you know, again, poverty, they see the train, and it reminds them of their time, you know, earlier on, when the family was more complete. And then when Appu moves away, the train is literally right on the horizon, this symbol of him coming back home to her. So she sits there waiting for this train to go past in the hopes that he'll return to her. And in the third film, it's also, the trains are a part of it very much, and a toy train is a very big part of the ending of the film. I just like the way that trains were kind of brought into the series as a way of getting into the certain emotions of the characters. I really like that. And as a random aside, I was a huge fan of trains when I was a kid. Always been fascinated with the steam engines and so on. So I love any movie that has a train in it. You know, I just love trains for some reason. So that was a big plus for me. I liked how again the train was part of each film in different ways, and they kind of link throughout the three films. Anyway, enough about the trains. Is it a film you should see before you die? Yes, I do think it is, and I do think now that I've seen all three films in the trilogy, the second film is, I don't know, I'm trying to think how it would work if you just removed the second film and just jumped to the third one. I think it wouldn't, because there's essential parts of the story missing. So it is essential as far as Appu's entire story is concerned, but I still think that the second film, you know, it's not a film you should see before you die. But if I was to judge it as one whole film, as this, you know, the trilogy being one film, it still is, I think, a film, well, definitely is a film you should see before you die, because of the stuff in the first film and the third film, and even the second half of the second film. It's just that first 40 to 45 minutes of the second movie that I just think don't really work along with the rest of it, because of that lack of connection I felt with Appu's character. So it is what it is, but this film definitely brought this series back to form in more of a full fashion. Like, I think the whole film is great. Love the acting, I love the direction, and the stuff that happens in the end of the film I thought was just so well done, which I'll talk about in just a second. So yeah, definitely for me, a film you should see before you die. Now, into some spoilers. So in the third act, and again it plays into what I was saying in the review of the second film, it's this steamroller of melodrama where Appu, you know, doesn't really want to get married, he has no plans of getting married, falls into this arranged marriage, starts to fall in love with this girl, and then she goes away for a couple of months to her parents, and she dies. she dies in childbirth. One problem I'll say is that she clearly wasn't showing that she was pregnant at all. She would have had to have been, you know, at least, you know, 4 to 5 months pregnant. I guess it's possible that you wouldn't see and that they wouldn't start showing, but I don't know. Very minor niggle. I just thought about that now. I didn't think about it when I was watching the film. So Appu gets this news and he's devastated, obviously, and unlike the other kind of massive losses he's had in his life, like the loss of his sister, again, spoilers for the whole trilogy, the loss of his sister, you know, his father, his mother, he's had to kind of just soldier through it, but at this point it utterly breaks him. It shatters him to pieces, and he just leaves. And he doesn't go and see his son. And for, I think, 4 years actually, he never sees his son. And so his son is forced to grow up with his grandparents. And we follow Appu as he, you know, travels the land as a nomad and grows a beard. And very powerful sequence when he's up on this hilltop and it's shot so beautifully, and then the actual action of the scene is so just tragic. He takes his manuscript and he just lets it fall, and it just flies out into the forest. It's like, oh my god, what are you doing? As a writer, not to sound like a wanker, but the idea of writing, you know, almost a whole book and only on paper as well, no backup, and just letting it fall into a forest off the top of a hill is just like, oh my god. It just, yeah, in more reasons than just the character and what it meant for him, it was just this kind of, oh no, all that work, you know. But it's a striking moment. And finally we have Pulu, his friend, comes to visit the son and learns that Appu's off somewhere working in a coal mine, and occasionally sends money for his son. So Pulu tracks down Appu and finds him and says, what are you doing? You know, you've got to go see your son. And Appu eventually says, look, I don't feel anything for him. I admit it, you know, I'm a terrible person, but I don't care about my son. And he sees it as his son kind of being the person who took his wife away from him. And again, you got to think about this character who's been through nothing but loss throughout his life. And then the very end of the film, he turns up and tries to kind of form a relationship with his son. And I love the young actor who played his son. He really portrayed that sense of betrayal. You know, he just was not really looking to trust this man who has been away for his whole life. You know, this is a kid who's grown up without any parents, just his grandparents. And a lot of people go through that, but for his dad to suddenly turn up after 4 years and say, hey, you know, not that he does that, but, you know, this kid is not having any of it. And so it's like heartbreaking again, and the whole series is heartbreaking in a lot of ways. But then that ending, when, you know, he decides to just leave and, okay, I'm not getting through, and I've tried, but it's obviously not going to work. So he leaves, and he's walking away, and it's like, oh my god, this is it. You know, what a horrible ending. And then he turns around, this little kid in the distance, just stood there frozen. And then he turns around and he starts walking. The kid starts following him. He turns around, the kid stops. And then he walks up to him. And I loved how the scene played out, where the kid wasn't willing to kind of say out loud that you're my dad, even though he knew he was. You know, he's like, you know, where are you going? Oh, to Calcutta. Is my dad there? Yeah, your dad's there. Well, who are you? Oh, I'm just your friend. He's like, okay. Do you want to come with me? And he's like, He's like, come on, just come with me, you know. And then the kid comes with him. And he picks him up on his shoulders and he walks off, this big smile on his face, and then the grandfather is just like trailing off trying to find the kid, and he's got the toy train in his hand, and it all comes full circle in some way. And Appu's got this big smile on his face, and he walks off with his son, you know, hopefully to a better life, you know. And I suppose it's probably a good thing there's no fourth movie, because it probably would have involved the death of his son. You know, it's like, what more can we do to this character? But it was just such a touching moment where it wasn't this, you know, stereotypical sappy kind of, well, it was a sappy ending, but it wasn't one where he was like, you know, I'm your dad, come on, come home to me, and he hugged him, oh, this is all perfect. No, the kid was still like, you know, well, you're just a friend, you're not my dad just yet, you know, you got to prove yourself. And I think that's key to the film's success dramatically, is that it wasn't all tied up neatly, completely. While the image of him with his son on his shoulders, happy, all smiles, seems like it's the perfect ending, there's still work to be done there. And that's all through the writing, I think. So, yeah, I loved the ending, you know, and it was, again, heartbreaking when his wife died. And I've used the word heartbreaking so many times, but that is the way I feel about the series. But there's always these moments of humanity that are peppered in there, that kind of keep you going and keep you inspired to continue with this horrible, tragic tale of Appu. And, you know, there's all these great little, like I said, the train track sequence of Appu and Pulu just walking along these train tracks, really long shot, friends really just talking shit, but it just felt so believable. It's just a slice of life these just moments, again, like I said, in the second one, and it's not my words, I got it from one of those special features. Satyajit Ray, he does these films that, obviously, because he's making them in India, he does these films that are so full of and informed by the Indian culture that to a lot of us over here is very alien. But at the base of it, at the core of it, is the human emotion and the human experience, which he captures so well. And so I think it's a universally relatable style of telling stories in a world that is different to us. And so I think that's really interesting. I'd be intrigued to see what, or to know what Indian people think of these films, you know. Being so familiar with the culture, you know, is there a different way of viewing it? I don't know, because I do think that the different style and different culture is a part of my enjoyment of it, because it's just different and it's fresh to me. And I like that aspect to it. But I do think if you strip that all away and just look at the characters and where they go, anyone can connect to it, if they've got a heart anyway. So there we go. That's my thoughts on the Appu trilogy as a whole. What an incredible series of films. Again, the first one far outstrips the other two, but I think the third one really brings it back, and there's some really great moments in the second film too. Definitely ones to go back to again and again. I found a new favourite series for sure. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. But I've been so inspired by these films that there's one more Satyajit Ray film in the book, and I'll be reviewing that in the next episode. So I thought I'll just go all out and watch another film by this director, because I'm so tuned into his work right now. So you can look forward to that. And leave your thoughts down below on any of the films in the Appu trilogy, and this one in particular. And I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.